Hey, it's Nate.
Hey, it's Brian.
Hey, it's Barry.
Welcome back to the Collecti-Bros podcast. This is the second episode of 2024 of our mainline series, Is It Worth It? Topic of discussion today, Castlevania, Legacy of Darkness for Nintendo 64. If you guys like what we do here, I would sincerely appreciate if you check us out on our social media platforms. We are at Collecti-Bros Pod at all major social medias. Where you will get the most engagement, where we enjoy hanging out the most, is our Discord. You have an invite link in the episode's description. Please join us to discuss all things Is It Worth It, or any of our other topics at hand. It's a small community, so you won't be overshadowed and your stuff won't get hidden. We really love engaging with you guys when we can, which is often as possible. So
it's just me shitposting.
There is some shitposting. So if you guys want to shitpost, we implore you to shitpost too. I feel like this pick's kind of a shitpost. But yeah,
I don't know why that made you laugh so hard.
Unexpected.
Discord's where it's at. We love engaging with our community, so please join us. Give us episode suggestions, whatever you guys want to say. It's pretty Wild Westy, so join us there. But let's talk about Castlevania Legacy of Darkness. Give you guys some information about this game at first. This is a unique one. I feel like it's a game you really can't talk about without talking about another game. So Castlevania 64 came out the same year as this game. It came out in January of 99 in North America. Castlevania Legacy of Darkness came out in December of 99 in North America. This was Castlevania 64 specifically. It was Konami's first 3D console game. If you listen to our next episode, it's kind of a nice little bridge. But the development of this game is very interesting. They believed in what they were doing. They had a date they had to meet, and it was extremely rushed and hectic development. If you've played Castlevania 64, you would understand that almost immediately. You can honestly make the argument that this one feels that way too. But this game is more true to the vision of Castlevania 64. If you see the early press release material for Castlevania 64, the character in this game, a lot of stuff that was included in this game was supposed to be in Castlevania 64 initially that got cut due to crunch time. They promised 4 playable characters. They promised different campaigns, different enemy types that never made it. And the very first press image of Castlevania 64 actually has the main character from this game in it. So this is more true to Konami's true vision of Castlevania 64. But I want to make it very clear, because I had misconceptions going into this game. It is a separate game.
It's a prequel.
Yes. So I actually avoided this game for a while because I heard it was basically just the same game as 64, but it's definitely not, dude.
I'm in the same boat.
There's a lot of misinformation about this game out there.
I actually played Castlevania 64 first, and I was like, wow, I have no interest in this. And I thought this was just a cleaned up version of that. And I mean, to some degrees it is. But yeah, it is interesting. I avoided this one for a long time for that particular reason, because of the taste Castlevania 64 left in my mouth.
And with that uniqueness of being kind of like a companion game in a lot of ways, there's just so much uniqueness to this game. So it's an interesting note, it's just release date. We actually got this Legacy of Darkness before anyone else. We got it before Japan.
Interesting. Same
month, but we got it early December. They got it literally on Christmas. And then Europe didn't get this game until 2000 in March. So
holy shit.
It's a unique
It's not too far. It's only 3 months.
It's unique though, the fact that we got a Japan developed game first. Doesn't happen a whole lot, especially for a Japanese console. So now that we have a little of the information out of the way, let's talk about the story, which Castlevania, here we go. So I like to think of Castlevania stories. If you want to make it deep, you can kind of dig and find a lot of crazy information, or you can just like Dracula bad, let's go smash some stuff. Now, the Castlevania canon's a mess at this point. Officially, this game does not take place in the canon anymore. I think that it's going to come up later as kind of an interesting point, but story for specifically Legacy of Darkness, this campaign. The main character you control's name is Cornell. He's afflicted with being a man-beast. He's half werewolf. He can kind of better control over his powers than most man-beasts, though. He's been living with this affliction for a while.
He's not a werewolf. He's not a man-beast. He's a man-wolf.
He's a man-wolf.
Man-wolf.
He's a man that chooses to be a wolf.
Specifically, Man wolf.
Yeah,
That's
so
how they refer to like the species.
Yes.
I love how the narrator
wolf.
calls him two narrators like man wolf.
Yeah. So not your traditional full moon. I can't control myself. It's very, I guess, different.
Very unconventional for a Castlevania protagonist as well.
100%.
Not related to a Belmont at all.
Unique perspective. With that becomes unique powers. So your werewolf that has a man wolf, that has the ability to control his powers more than most of their werewolves. You return to your village. You see it on fire, being attacked. You rush to your home. You notice that there's a medallion laying on the ground. The game points out that this belonged to your little sister. You're going to go figure out what the heck happened and get some butt-kicking revenge against some baddies. When Cornell gets to the entrance of, where every Castlevania game takes place, good ones anyways, Castlevania, Dracula's Castle, you run into your old friend / rival. His name is Ortega. Yes, like the Mexican food products. Tacos.
Taco
shells.
So, was there anything prior to this game that had Cornell or Ortega in it?
This will be their first. Which I know what you're...
Okay.
It's very like...
Yeah, continue.
hell, because it's also just dropping on you super fast, and I was going to bring that point up after explaining the story, yeah.
I was just... I figured you would touch on it. I just wanted to clarify if there was anything
based on your experience, I thought there would be too.
For clarification purposes, this was my first Castlevania game, and you guys, once again, can thank me.
Whoa. Don't you dare put guys. It's not plural. Guy. This man picked it out, not me.
This is my pick, to be fair.
We'll give you a palate cleanser. Don't worry.
So you get excited.
I'm never coming back to the series ever again.
Don't do that.
I'll save you.
So when you talk to Ortega, thinking he's kind of like a friendly face, you notice he's on the other side of the castle gates. And
he's also a man wolf, right?
He is a man wolf.
Okay.
He's a man wolf that's got a little more problems than you, though. And you realize very quickly, yeah, he's responsible for attacking your village. Yeah, he's working with Dracula. Yeah, he kidnapped your sister. And he sold his soul for more power so he could kick your butt specifically, because apparently years ago you guys had a fight and he couldn't best you. So he basically sold out your sister, your village, for more man-wolf powers.
I thought he turned into a vampire man-wolf.
Yeah, it's like vampire powers. It's like dark powers. They don't specifically say vampire, but it's vampiric elements. So basically Dracula's magic enhances them.
He's a vampire man-wolf.
Yeah, he's a hybrid. But he sold his soul for power.
Dun, dun, dun! Underworld.
This basically sets up the rest of the story. You realize your mission. You have to defeat Ortega to get to your sister. Anything that gets in your way, and you know you're going to have to go into the depths of Dracula's castle. Thus setting up Castlevania Legacy of Darkness. Go through your whole adventure. Ending basically wins with a confrontation with Ortega. You beat Taco Boy. You realize that he was like, I made a mistake. We're not really sacrificing your sister yet. Through a series of events, you find out the reason they kidnapped with your sister was to perform a ritual to resurrect Dracula early. This game does not take place in the 100-year cycle, which is an interesting note for Castlevania story-wise. You end up confronting Dracula, beating Dracula, kind of, because the trade-off is, hey, give me my sister back and you can have my man-wolf powers and all the dark energy that has, because Dracula recognizes very early on that you have like a special connection to your powers. You can control it better. This game is a prequel, as Barry mentioned. It sets up Castlevania 64 directly. You explain how Dracula was resurrected in Castlevania 64 by completing this game and realize Dracula's plan all along was to have Cornell's powers so he could do a dark ritual to be resurrected early before the 100-year cycle. Which, as a Castlevania thing, I think it's pretty cool how they explain Castlevania 64 being canon with this game specifically. So when Castlevania 64 came out initially, it was kind of a weird, like, why is it in the 100-year cycle? This game sets up the story for that. There is one other exclusive campaign in this game. It is very brief.
Got that thing on you, though.
Yeah. So in Cornell's journey, he encounters a child named Henry that he rescues and saves from Castlevania. The next
in a
horrible maze. God, we'll get to that, but the next campaign you play is actually Henry grown up. He's a knight, and he's got a pistola that is so devastating.
I thought it was a little sawed-off shotgun.
Dude, it's a fucking 6-shooter.
Okay.
But it looks like a shotgun.
So powerful,
it's so powerful. It's the most unbalanced Castlevania weapon in any of the games. It's crazy.
Well, let's not fail to mention that you had to escape the maze from undead Ash with a chainsaw arm.
Chainsaw Frankenstein, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in this campaign, the church basically sends you to go rescue children that are trapped while the events of Castlevania 64 are happening. So it's a shorter campaign because it's an in and out mission. It's a shorter campaign also because you have a fucking gun and it makes things very easy. But you basically play the same levels that are in Legacy of Darkness up to a certain point. When you extract the kids, you get out. But I got through that campaign like an hour, literally. It's so short.
Yeah.
But there is a cool get you moment because when Henry's a little kid, he's being chased by Ash Frankenstein. You can go back and fight Ash Frankenstein and kind of get your revenge on him. So, but that one's almost not even worth mentioning story wise because it's so brief. It's almost just like a hey, facing your inner demons as a child and as a man, and there's not really. You got things that early 3D games, so there's not a whole lot of narrative here. The push is the gameplay, so like all this story is very much from like manual, and there are cutscenes, but they're like there's no voice acting. They're reading text, and it's kind of just to get you to the next stage and we'll explain why you're in the next stage. It's not a selling point of this game specifically, or really, like I'll be honest, this series.
I'll say as like the resident Castlevania guy, this is an interesting one because there's no connection to the Belmonts. There is in Castlevania 64, sure, but this one specifically, no. And, yeah, being off that 100-year cycle is a really interesting thing. And, I'm going to butcher his fucking name. It's Koshi Ikiaga, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically declared this game when Konami gave him the objective of correcting the timeline. He basically put this in like as a Gaiden or a Gaiden like sub-game because the producers at the time had that same vision. Where it's like it's not on the 100-year timeline, so it's kind of spin off, if you will. It's pretty interesting as a Castlevania fan. But here's where it gets really crazy. When they announced the 3DS one. Why am I struggling with names today?
Mirror of
Lords of Shadow.
It's the spin-off from Lord of Shadow. Yeah, Mirrors of Fate. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, that's close.
So when you pre-ordered that, GameStop was giving out posters of like the Castlevania timeline, and this is still existing in the North American timeline. Fun fact.
Yeah, but we haven't had a new Castlevania game.
Yep.
So it's the same timeline.
Yep. So yeah, as a fan of the series, this one's interesting from the story standpoint. And yeah, a lot of these games, minus the Lord of Shadows games, don't have a ton of meat on the bone, but they'll like not fit this in with like official, Castlevania lore and that 100-year cycle being so pivotal to the series. It's a pretty interesting take. And a werewolf, super, super unique. My bad, man-wolf.
I want to hit a point Barry brought up previously. It's like, was there any previous games? No. Like, because it very much feels like you're supposed to kind of know who he is and what he's about. And there's not, I think he looks cool. I think he's interesting. Like Brian said, he's not a Belmont. But, like, there's not enough there to even care about him. And I think it's a limitation of the technology and just kind of when the game was made, too. It's unfortunate because I think there's potential for a decent story here if it was made in a different era.
I mean, I don't care so much about needing to know who Cornell is. Like, as far as I was aware, he was a guy with man-wolf powers who's trying to rescue his sister. I have more of hang-ups on them introducing Ortega and then establishing dialogue like we were supposed to know what's going on. I'm like, who are you and what is this beef? It's like speaking in a dialogue term, like the writing was like we were privy to information, and I was sitting there being like, did I miss a whole chapter? Did I miss
I had that same
a cutscene? Like, what did I skip something on accident? What happened?
How's Ortega know so much about Dracula, too?
Soul to Soul, bro.
Yeah, but like it takes like the focus. The Castlevania games, like your driving force is like, here's this all-encompassing evil, like go stop them.
There was a lot of characters that like there was no establishment for. Like I don't even know who they were. The two people that were with Death.
Yeah, the people conspiring to raise
that
Dracula.
Wanted to bring Dracula back. I'm like, I don't understand who you are.
Which were like, they tried to make a subplot and make you care about him, but one ended up being like a fake Dracula decoy until the real one was alive, and it was just like a point that was completely dropped as soon as you killed him, and you're kind of like, okay, was that just to scare people away from the castle? Then the chick, like, she was, when she first appeared, you're like, oh, that's interesting, but I can't even remember her name. She was so like non-important. You have Death, who's like a Castlevania mainstay, but
there's just a lot of misses, and
no doubt.
I think I don't really know if this will be in gameplay or not, as much as story, but like the last fight with Ortega when he's finally like, hey man, this is gonna be it, like you bested me, now it's my turn to like clap your ass, and he starts like transforming and he's like these powers, and I'm like, okay, he's gonna be like a big giant like vampire scary looking wolf, and he turns into a chimera, and I was like, why are you a chimera now?
No wonder
There's
you got
not even a
stomped
wolf
previously.
in that.
Yeah.
There's no wolf in that.
Yeah.
Did Dracula just was like, I'm going to give you superpowers, and he made him a chimera with no trace of any kind of canine anything in it. I'm like, you got a goat and a lion and a snake.
He's like, I got all these skeletons laying around here. I need
Where's
something
the
to chew on
dog?
their bones.
Where's the dog?
Ortega.
All right. Okay. So that was I was a little excited. It was like, okay, I got to finally see what this guy's about, and it was like basic ass D&D chimera. Cool. Thanks.
I thought it was gonna be Blue Wolf versus Red Wolf. That's what I thought.
Oh,
I thought he was going to be like, because his whole color is kind of like yellow, like he's blonde. So I think he was going to be like this huge,
Frosted
jacked,
Super Saiyan
like,
wolf. Yeah.
like
Frosted
crazy
tips,
looking,
bro.
like,
Yeah.
I don't know, because his eyes got all crazy looking too. And I'm like, this is going to be a crazy vampire werewolf hybrid. No.
Sugar Ray, dude. Frosted tips. Yep.
No.
Guy Fieri. That'd be sick.
No.
So I feel like the story, like, it's hard to sit there and say it's a letdown, but I think it's more a limitation of the hardware and like just 3D games in general at the time. And honestly, when we're playing Castlevania, we're focusing on gameplay. So let's jump to that. That's the problem with this game, though.
One of them.
My first note for gameplay says, So, Castlevania is traditionally an action platformer. I would consider this game the same. It's a 3-dimensional action platformer. And to be very clear, it's an early 3D action platformer, which we all know kind of causes problems. Brian, compared to a traditional Castlevania, how would you say this kind of meets as far as a gameplay point?
So it's interesting because I had no experience playing this going in, and comparing it to Castlevania 64, again, sorry to bring it up, but the platforming was the biggest issue with that game. And I don't think necessarily the turn of events, the time platformers were hot. Konami obviously wanted to make this more platform heavy than previous Castlevania entries, which there is a lot of jumping and platforming, but this is literally like you're climbing up to one platform, you're jumping to another platform in a 3D space. There's a surprising amount of like moments where you just don't have any combat or any enemies on screen, where you're literally just dodging obstacles or avoiding obstacles in this game. It's interesting to me how, because even in like the traditional, Metroidvania style Castlevanias, or even we'll go to the NES era, there's always enemies coming at you from the left or the right of the screen constantly. This game, there's long stretches where there's no enemies on the screen whatsoever. It's a very different take on traditional Castlevania formula. Very platform heavy, emphasis on 3D platformer. Platform. Literally platforms.
I had an experience playing this game where I feel like the first half is much more action heavy than the second half, where I was like, oh, this fighting is a bigger issue, or like solving a puzzle while trying to fight off people. And I feel like the last half of the game, especially when you're like actually deep into the castle, it's like this is all platforming. There's large sections, like almost hours and whole levels that are basically just climbing, jumping.
Even the very first
It's
thing.
literally right after the mansion.
Yep.
Right after the maze, all of it just drops.
It's very much like 2 games they put into one.
But even the very first thing you're doing on the ship, like you're climbing the mast, you're going up, like there's a couple enemies, sure, but it's a far cry from traditional Castlevania, where I feel like it does have that perfect balance of like action platforming, where you actually have to combat enemy types and use different types of secondary weapons, defeat certain enemies, at a higher probability, versus jump up, climb, go from platform to platform. This is definitely a product of its time where platformers were all the rage.
Which is interesting because they definitely tried to make this a Castlevania game. You still have your traditional Castlevania, like you have the weapons you pick up that you can use with like your rubies, which
Sub weapons, yeah.
Didn't use them.
I was just going to say I had a funny conversation with Barry because Barry didn't even play with them.
Nope.
I mean, did you need to? That's what's crazy.
The combat
No,
was
you didn't.
My biggest issue with this game overall was the combat was almost unnecessary because it was either just so easy or like unnecessary, or you just had to accept you were getting hit and hopefully you got like more hits than the character. So they had to put combat because it's part of Castlevania, but it's not traditional whip combat. Technically your character has 2 attacks. You got a claw attack and a beam attack. Anyone want to raise their hand if they use the claw attack? I only
did to open breakable objects.
I just shot him.
Yeah, the beam has the range of a traditional whip, which is another interesting point in this game. There's not a whip, and that's like the most Castlevania weapon.
The thing about the beam though is it basically doesn't miss.
Right, it like locks
And
on.
it doesn't cost little gems to use. So
Or your
why would I
life,
throw
or-
an axe and it costs little gems when I can just beam for the same amount of damage, if not more?
And I feel like it's an unfortunate thing because I very much appreciate they put the classic like axe, crossbow, boomerang. I'm sorry, not crossbow, cross boomerang, the daggers, like all their classic Castlevania like weapons that you want are there. This just did not feel necessary at all. Holy water's there.
There was a couple bosses I would use the cross on, like the guy that flew around, I'd lock onto him and throw a cross. And then the one where you're trapped with like the firewall in the pit, I was throwing holy water down. But I guarantee you I could have beat them with just the actual like
The
magic
beam was
attack.
the best attack by far.
Yeah, because it had the range of a whip, and like you could lock on the enemies. It didn't miss. It's the combat was definitely interesting in this one. I do appreciate the Castlevania sub weapons because when they take them out, it's a glaring omission. But yeah, totally unnecessary. Totally unnecessary.
I mean, they take him out and it's a glaring omission, but that's basically what they did in this game. They made him completely obsolete.
Yeah, you had to have them because it was like, well, we're Castlevania, but they didn't do anything.
I picked him out because I felt obligated to pick shit up.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's funny. This game has like an identity crisis of trying to be a Castlevania game, but like it's not really. I know people are like, oh, it feels like no, it really doesn't because the combat is really simple, too simple to be blunt for it to be like an action game. Like it's there, but most enemies are one shot, two shot.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot of like having to sit there and plan your placement of like ducking, dodging, jumping out of the way of projectiles and attacks. You can really just smoke them because a beam. Barry brought it up. It's so effective. It doesn't miss. You can just beam, and you clear the room out.
Yeah.
So
I think I tried to experiment a little bit in the beginning area, like where the giant like monkey skeleton was, where there would just be skeletons that would pop up. Like you couldn't kill them all; they would just keep coming.
yeah,
So I was like, okay, let me see how many hits it takes for a claw attack and how many hits it takes for a beam. And like one beam attack just like decimated them. I think it was 4 claw attacks.
like why would you ever?
And
use
not only was it like 4 claw attacks, but the beam would just like destroy the skeleton entirely, right? The bones were just gonna go poof and just plop around everywhere. The claw attack, if you hit the skeletons, I think 2 of them and it destroyed the legs, and then the body would be crawling on the ground. And the thing is you can't claw it when it's on the ground. You have to crouch and then claw it to actually hit it. So I was like, no, I'm never using this. I'm literally no. Because I wanted to experiment. I said, okay, is there a damage difference? Like what? No. After that, I was like, I'm not using it. There's no
You're a better
reason.
person than me. I didn't even try. I was just like beam.
I just feel like there's a lot of mechanics that were implemented in this game that's just like, what's the point? I had that thought several times. Like, what's the point?
I'll go as far to even say the biggest thing that separates this game from other Castlevania games, the werewolf. Like, you didn't need to be a werewolf at all. Like when you can transform into a
I
werewolf.
didn't do anything extra.
Yeah,
It's supposed to.
it's nothing, and it uses.
I think your damage was increased a little bit.
Slightly, and it uses your secondary crystals. So how many you have is basically your timer. You just turn into Ultraman, I guess, and you're on a countdown.
I had 99 forever.
Yeah, exactly. But like it didn't.
Because I didn't use items.
It didn't add as much as it should have for such a driving point and such a pivotal point to this character.
I feel like combat is where this game struggles.
For sure.
And tying into gameplay, we always tie in controls. I think this game is universally agreed upon as having not great controls.
Yeah, here's my thing with the controls.
I mean, I argue that 64 games have poor controls all around, but that's just
That's always going to be a thing with
gonna raise
64.
just me.
The only time you'll ever hear me say this sentence too, I think this is one game that does benefit from using the actual 64 controller because of the way the C button and holding the R1 operated. I'm sure you can map it to a different controller and it's fine. But the camera is bad in this game.
The camera is the most dogshit camera I've ever played with.
It's literally the reason why I want
Ever.
to pick this up. Because Castlevania 64 is like one of the only few I haven't made it to at least Dracula in or beat. Because it's a camera. I was like, I have no interest in doing this to myself. This game definitely improves the camera, but it's still got early 90s platforming issues.
Barry, I know you had the most issues with the camera. Share some of your horror stories with us.
I just don't know how you guys didn't have wall collision problems. Anytime I tried to center the camera behind my character and I was anywhere near a wall collision.
Brian
Constantly.
had some problems, so
And then the problem was I couldn't aim up or down. Like I said, I guess not yet, but you can't have a 3D environment and not be able to look up or down.
Yeah.
And for you also to implement puzzle platforms that require you to jump higher or jump lower into a place that you cannot see. And I just had to, pray. I was like, all right, let me just pray and hope that I can land on this tiny fucking stick sitting out of the side of the wall. Like, whatever. It was just terrible. It was bad.
Some of those jumps you had to get right with God before you made that leap.
There's one specific area I want to bring up because I think the camera was like the most impactful part. We all had a funny experience with it. There's an area towards the end of the game after
in the clock tower.
Yep, in the clock tower,
Mm-hmm.
where it requires you to drop down to this tiny, thin board. And then you have to fall slightly left to go down a slanted plane to fall on top of a platform. I watched Brian struggle for 24 minutes, try to make this platform.
I couldn't see it was part of the problem.
I don't know what the hell happened. I was like, give me the controller. And I got it my first try. Barry.
Look, dog.
The speedrunner.
Here's what I did. I got to the top of that. I dropped down. Okay, and at this point, like, I admit I'm not playing the cart because we only had one, so I was like, okay, I'm going to emulate it. And originally I would do save states like at the save points. So I act like I would be saving, but I would just it's faster to save state than it is to save in the game. This one I said fuck this. I'm saving right at the top because I'm not doing this. I think I fell probably 8 to 10 times. Or I would fall and die or I would fall and not die and I was like, nope, load save state. I don't care. So I finally got to the stick, and then I got to the stick like 3 or 4 times, but anytime I'd shift to the left, it would like my character would overcorrect and just shoot completely off the side. So I said, fuck this. Got on the stick, walked out to the end, ate some chicken, and just jumped off. I took damage. I didn't die, but I landed right in the little walkway with the gate, and I was like, all right, let me eat the more of the chicken I got because I have 1 billion chicken because I have not, like, why would you spend your money on anything else in this game?
Right.
So I was just like, and then just yeeted, and it worked. And I was like, yep, I don't have to worry about that no more.
So yeah, there's like, I don't care. I had the least experience with the camera being a problem, but to sit here and say it wasn't a problem is ridiculous. Like, I had major problems with the camera too. I just kind of adapted to it a little better than some, but it is the glaring control issue of this game, no doubt, is the camera, which the scary thing is Legacy of Darkness is a huge improvement over 64.
I'm not exaggerating. It's literally 100 times better than Castlevania 64.
Even with
which is terrifying,
the
but
platforming in this game is significantly
Well, if
better.
you wanted to know if this game was worth it, Castlevania 64 is not.
absolutely correct.
It's funny. We'll go over that when I talk about the collectability aspects. Like hilarious points.
The answer is
I have.
no from me on 64.
Even like the platforming in this one, they did a better job of addressing like its momentum in 3D platforming. Like, you need to have a good feel of like your forward progress, when to jump, depth of the jump. This one does a so much better job. The one thing this one does that is like a mercy. So if you hold A, like, you are Spider-Man, bro, you're sticking to whatever you like is near you, so you can kind of pull yourself up. And it's a real lifesaver.
I don't care what anyone says. That right there, and then the improved, in quotations, camera are the 2 biggest, like, glaring godsends compared to Castlevania 64.
Oh, if there was no way to jump and cling to the side of something, I would have gave this game up within like the first 2 levels.
Same.
I would have been like, screw this game, I'm not
Mr.
playing
Castlevania,
it.
that's why I never went back to 64, for that same reason.
Good
like,
Lord.
that same beginning part where you're climbing up to get to the castle, do that without sticking, it's impossible. I said, fuck this.
I think what this game does is, as a whole, it doesn't do a lot of things, and the very few things that it does them all really fucking poorly. So it's like the combat's not good. The combat's simple and it's still not good. The platforming's simple and it's still not good. The controls are simple and they're still not good. The graphics are simple and they're still not good. The story is simple and it's still not good. Like, everything about this is like not good. The only thing that I can think of that's positive that I noticed when I was playing the game is the puzzle aspect of it is kind of progressive. So, and I think I noticed this more, I want to say in like the later levels with the lava. There was a portion where these cubes would come out of the side of the wall and then they would move on a conveyor belt, and the conveyor belt would roll into itself, and if you walked into the crack, you fucking died because you got squished. But like, the first cube would come out and it would just be the cube, and then you'd walk through that, and then you'd go up another level, and then it would be the cube, but then it would add something else. And then you would get through it, and you walk up to the next level, and then it would be a little different. And by the time you got to the top, it like added elements to it, so it was kind of like training you how to get through these, and then make it more complicated as you went. So I felt like the level design of the platforming was better in that level and the clock tower. I feel like it was more thoughtful.
Yes.
But the matter of fact is like, it was still hot garbage. So
there were some things that were interesting, like the one level where you need to keep looking down at the map to find the yellow squared rooms. Like, there's some things in this game that, like,
I feel like this game did a lot better when it was an adventure game than an action platformer. Because, like, even some of the puzzles, like, I don't think they hit a home run, but they, at least, I'll give them credit for innovation. There's a day and night cycle in this game. So, nighttime, your enemies are more powerful. They're harder to kill, but I didn't have that problem with the beam. But there's certain puzzles you can only do during night, certain doors you can open during day. So, like, there is a decent experimentation as far as implementing a game mechanic feature, but I think it kind of feels like everything else where it just fell flat. Honestly, I'll give them an A for effort, but
I appreciate the effort for the day and night cycle. It's clearly a callback to Castlevania 2.
Right.
But you know what? I fucking hate that kind of shit where it's like, you have to wait in this exact area for this rose petal to fall at 6 a.m. exactly. Without a guide, man, come on.
there is a couple puzzles in this game that were a little ridiculous that reminded me of Simon's Quest, no doubt.
And that's not a good thing just for, non-Castlevania people. It's not a good thing.
Anyone else have any comments about controls or gameplay other than Barry did not like them at all?
I do think it's definitely
it's terrible.
It's a product of its time for sure. This was when they were still trying to figure out 3D platforming. Unless, you have Mario 64 on the same console, which does it flawlessly, but all right.
I actually have in my notes, this is probably the most dated game we've played on the podcast so far. It is very dated.
And then, like, not to mention, like, if we want to talk about combat and, like, how everything's simple and it's still not done well, like, the challenge of this game is the platforming. 100%.
The camera.
All of the bosses,
Yeah.
minus the last one, I could just stand there and shoot it with a ranged attack. The puzzles that included fire, I just let the fire hit me and just ate some chicken later. There was one that Nate and I talked about with the conveyor and the mine shaft, and as you're like going up on the little mine car, there's like fire shooting, and sometimes it shoots straight, and sometimes it shoots up. And that's when Nate was like, "That was the only time I used the crouch button," and I was like, "Dude, I just stood there and let it hit me. I didn't care. It didn't knock me off."
And there's not a penalty for buying more chicken. There's not like you can only carry 10. Like, you can just keep buying it.
And it was
chicken
like,
and beef.
And it would be like the fire damage would be like a 16th of your health bar. Yeah. It was like inconsequential damage. Then I was like, okay, I have a chicken that does 50% of my top, 80% of my top, or a health kit that does all of it. I said, I'll let this fire burn me down to like 2 pixels and then just heal.
Eat beef and you're fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like traditional Castlevania damage would have added a huge depth to this game. So like initial Castlevanias, you got hit and it was like a bounce back. It kicked you backward. So like platforming was a challenge when you were fighting and dodging. It was all part of the gameplay and it made it more exciting than just I need to make this jump. This one's very much like I just need to sit here and wait.
I mean, if the trap
There's no penalty for getting hit in this game.
Like, if the trap damage was more substantial, it would have made me, like, think a little bit more about, like, what I was doing. But I was like, I don't care if I'm spider shimmying across a wall and there's a flamethrower hole. I'm just gonna
eat it.
Well, those ones I think it knocked you off.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I'll just go, wait for that one. But like, if I just there were so many of them, or the very beginning where you had to go the 2 sides of the towers and the little thing would come down and chomp you.
Yeah.
Whatever. I just
brush it off.
Let it chomp me for
several times. I'm like, oh,
a 10th of my health and keep going.
Yeah.
So, in the last boss, like, I have a lot of problems with that last boss. It's probably one of the worst bosses I've ever played in a game. And the problem with that is the camera is way too close to the boss. It's static. It's
at
fixed.
an angle too. It's weird.
It's at a weird angle. You can't even see like your knees down, so you don't know where the floor is. Everything is in darkness except for you and the boss. You have no sense of depth of like where you can run, and where you actually physically can run is so small that you just can't dodge anything this guy does. So it's just me getting juggled. Absolutely juggled, and then waiting for the face to open up so I can hit it one time, get juggled again, eat some chicken, and then just wait.
We had the exact same experience.
I was just like, this isn't fun. Like, at least, I don't know, with the ones like that flied around, I was like, okay, gotta run around and dodge some fireballs or something. I don't know. This one was just, I guess I'm just gonna get juggled
when you're playing,
and eat my beef.
When you're playing a Castlevania game and first form Dracula fights more fun than final form, it's a problem.
Even him.
I mean, he just held
Even
you.
him, what he would do is he would turn into a bat.
Let me get clear.
And then he would reform, and if you shot him too soon, he would shoot like dissipate into a bat again. So I would just wait until he would reform, wait a second, and then hit him with a beam, and then just rinse and repeat.
My favorite's when he grabbed you and just suck on you for an extremely long time. Just.
But anyways.
I actually had some notes about the bosses in the next topic I want to bring up. So let's go ahead and just jump to, God, graphics. All right.
Let's talk about that Simpsons monkey paw hand. That's all I'm saying.
It is an N64 game. Let's get this out of the way. So we already know the graphics are going to be rough. We'll use that word. I'll get everyone else's thoughts kind of first. Barry, since you don't have a whole lot of Castlevania experience, let's talk about the graphics.
All right, boy. I don't need
fair.
a lot of Castlevania experience. The thing with the 64, unless you are making a cartoony stylized game, the graphics are going to be ass. You can't try a realistic style on the 64. I don't care what anybody says, you can't do it. So what they tried to do with this one, it sucks.
Yeah.
End of story.
I think you have all the hallmarks of like the realistic approach. You have the really skinny arms and legs that just don't look right. You have the weird faces where they try to detail more than everything else, but they're still like smashed in and
Do you
very.
remember how veiny Dracula is?
Yeah.
His first form. He has like worms coming out of his face.
So it's rough. This is an expansion pack game, to be clear, so it does look better than some 64 games. It has all the hallmarks of most expansion pack games, though, where it does perform fairly well in low res mode. It performs like absolute dog shit and looks like dog shit in high res mode. So
I will say I didn't know that, and I picked high res, and for what it was, it looked okay. But
With that emulation magic, though.
I had
Get some help.
Looks like shit.
I had so bad slowdown
yep,
Yeah.
that's
in a specific area of the game that I was like, am I gonna even get through this room?
Damn.
this is
Like,
from reading.
I'm chopping like 4 frames a second.
This
It
is
was
like
awful.
one of the worst performing high res mode games on the 64. Konami has a history of where it's just absolutely did not know how to get anything extra out of expansion packs. And adding to the fact that this is basically their first foray into 3D, you can kind of do the math here. Like, if you're not going to listen to anything else we say about this game, do not play this game in high res. Like, it is not an experience you want to do, unless apparently emulating helps a little bit. But
No, it doesn't.
Oh, slow down.
Clearly not, because my slowdown was atrocious. I just don't understand why they were having such an issue with not being able to properly optimize memory. You even gave yourself extra memory and you can't optimize it properly?
I will
That
say,
makes no sense.
There's your first problem, too.
Oh,
where it
for the
says only
64?
464.
Yeah, I have my
Yeah.
feelings about the 64, and I'll leave them unsaid.
You ain't alone.
I think we can read between the lines. But, yeah, I will say this game does perform fairly well in low res mode. I never had really any frame rate problems. The graphics are what they are. They're designed that way. It's limitations of the console, but it was a surprisingly well performing game.
Yeah, I think it ran really smooth on low res with the expansion pack. I'd be curious to compare without.
I don't know if it even works without.
I will say there was one thing that did impress me with the graphics specifically. I think it was the sun and moon rooms where you had to keep toggling with the cards. There was swords on the wall, and when you threw the magic attack, I even said it out loud. I was like, "Hey, did you see that lighting effect? That was pretty cool. It actually followed the blade." And I was like, that was super impressive for a 64. I've never seen anything else
The light
like that.
traveling and
Yeah.
bouncing through the
That
tunnel.
was the only thing that was holy shit, that was actually pretty impressive. The rest of it's pretty muddy.
I was gonna say, in game design sense, it's a very dark game. It's ambient. It's going. They knew they weren't gonna be able to sit there and pump out cracks and bricks and stuff. So they went for an atmosphere. And overall, I feel like it succeeds in that regard. And I think it's really cool when you can have lighting effects in the dark, and it really utilizes some of the torch lighting. It was very impressive for that console. Brian mentioned the beam trail. Even when there was fireballs being shot at you, you could see the ambient light around it move. That was super impressive for the time.
Yeah, I
So,
agree.
especially on a 64, that was kind of wow. I would give that high marks in that regard. But if we
Praise
talk about
stops there
everything
for me.
else, Ortega was goofy as hell looking. We all have different interpretations of what he even looked like, and I
if there's one thing in this game that is a home run, slam dunk, absolute phenomenal job, it's the skeletons in the motorcycle on the sidecar and the
Absolutely.
hedge that can't shoot for shit.
Yeah.
Those were incredible. The first time he drove out there and was like spinning around at like 3 miles an hour, like a kid who just got their first time on a bike and just like cruising up to me like he's gonna attack me. I'm like, this is the goofiest thing I've ever seen. It's amazing. And then the next one, he came out with a sidecar. I said, it got goofier. Don't know how they did that.
That was so wild.
And then like you get to the point where the skeleton came out with the sidecar or with the motorcycle, and it was one little tiny spot with a lamp. And I'm like, where did you come from? There's nowhere for you to. This block wasn't even big enough. I'm like, that's just stupid.
Yeah, this game does have its own monsters that are exclusive to it, and the infamous one that will go on in Castlevania history is the sidecar motorcycle.
It's amazing.
One of the big features of this game that people were initially excited for is to see all these classic Castlevania monsters in being interpreted in 3D. So Brian, let's get some of your thoughts on that aspect, and I think we pretty much feel the same about it, honestly.
The biggest problem is that there's so few of them in the game, you can't really get a read. I think Barry's right. The skeletons look the best. And then some of the original bosses, like aesthetically, I think the skeleton hunchback thing was the most fun. But like, your hunchbacks, your Medusa heads,
they're in there, but like it's so foggy. It's not like that's a really cool.
I really only remember the skeletons, the ghosts, the skull head, like the flaming skulls that would come at you, the little Cerberus.
Oh, the fishmen.
Little dog. Oh yeah,
they don't have their spears though.
The fish guy. There was some that had spears. Okay. Some had spears and some didn't. Yeah. And the ones that did were a little harder to fight.
It's
I don't remember like a crazy
there's
variety.
A few of like your classic Castlevania ones, but like I agree with Brian. I don't think they got enough of them to be like, yeah, that was awesome, because like it should have been a big deal to see him in 3D the first time.
What were the jumping things?
The little flea guys,
the fleamen. Yeah.
I thought they were like Wizard of Oz flying monkeys.
I can see exactly why you thought that.
Okay, no, I didn't know what those were.
If you look up their sprite, they look way cooler. Yep. So I think that's kind of the general thought. I think all the sprites age and look way more detailed and cooler than the 3D character models do for the ones you want to see.
Even Final Form Dracula, the second form was, I think, probably based off of Bloodlines, if I had to guess. But it just kind of looked like a gargoyle. Its chest opened up. It's just a 64 game. I hate to be that guy.
We talked about the bosses. I wanted to bring them up for graphics specifically because when I first saw that last boss, I was like, this is going to be awesome. And then I realized how small of a space I was controlling in and like the mechanics of the boss fight. And I was like, damn it.
That boss fight
should have been awesome.
It felt like, oh shit, we didn't put a final boss in there. They were like, wait a second, there's another Dracula past. Like I thought Dracula was going to be like, he had the mechanics of being a final boss with the bats and the little things he'd shoot at you, and then the circle waves that would come out that would be on the floor, and then one would be midway up, so you're supposed to crouch. Like, there was a lot of variety in the way that he was fighting.
Tropes.
And I was like, this is going to be a really cool final fight for the 10 seconds it's going to last, but all right. And then the other one came out, and I'm like, did they forget?
It felt tacked on. It definitely did. And it sucks because, like, I think cinematically it looked super cool. Like, the camera angle, it's just, I have to actually play this instead of watch it. This is where it becomes a problem. I think there are several moments in this game where if you were just watching it and wouldn't have to actually control it and watching it in demo mode, it would look pretty badass, actually. But
didn't get your hands on that damn controller.
The thing with the video games is you have to actually control them and play them. So
some people make careers out of not playing them, though. Anyways.
But yeah, overall, I think
they're still cool, fun, and unique.
God damn it. Overall, I think we all have the same feelings on the graphics in this game. It's not going to be one that ages well. Even for the console, I feel like there's better examples of games that look better on N64.
I agree.
That go for this art style, honestly. So it's a valiant attempt at a first-time 3D property, but it's a big but. All right, guys. A big component of this franchise is the sound and music, so let's jump to that. I'm going to bring up the composer first. If we're talking Castlevania, music's a huge part of it. I do not speak Japanese, disclosure. His name is Masahiko Kimura. He's an in-house Konami studio composer. He's worked on properties like Metal Gear 2, Police Knots, Suikoden?
Suikoden.
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 He's worked on almost every Suikoden title for the music.
Well, however you say it, I don't know.
And if you want to hear his latest work, it's actually the remix of Castlevania songs I did for the Dead Cells DLC.
Awesome.
So he has a pretty good footing in working on Konami properties. He's worked on other Castlevania games. He worked on Dawn of Sorrow's music.
Nice.
So Castlevania 64 did the music for that as well. So I have natural continuations doing this game. When you compare this to what you expect from Castlevania, you go, wait a minute. But then you have to think of what console it's on. Then one, besides graphics and controls and camera, another limitation of your N64 is like the sound. So Brian, with the forethought of knowing what you expect from Castlevania.
Wow, it almost sounds like this is a cutting edge console.
What you get, right?
God.
I mean, I don't want to be too disparaging.
minute.
I just feel like, honestly, it's factual. I feel like
Got a
there's
fucking Game Boy Advance.
I feel like there's sound limitations, there's graphic limitations. I think, not to be mean, I think that all is true. Like, I get made fun of for picking N64 games all the time, but like, I'm not knocking it. I'm just stating, like, historically looking back, especially playing it, it all feels dated. Sound is a huge one. I mean,
it was dated the day it came out.
So Brian, knowing what you know with Castlevania and all the bangers, I mean, we had it on our music episode, for God's sakes. Like, talk about some of the sound and music in this game.
So here's the thing with this game. I'm not going to completely shit on it. I think the soundtrack's actually pretty great, and if you listen to it on its own, it's pretty good orchestra-style music. The thing is with Castlevania that kind of separates it from every other kind of game of that similar sound is like the mix with the rock and roll elements, right? Like there's no shredding guitar. The comparison, the contrast between the two is what makes Castlevania, as soon as you hear it, you're like, that sounds like a Castlevania song, where you have orchestra, you have an organ, you have a symphony, and then there's just like a dude shredding constantly. That's not in this game. I don't think this is a bad soundtrack, but if you're going to expect traditional Castlevania music, you're going to have to look elsewhere. There are some remixes to classical Castlevania songs in this, but there's no bloody tears. There's some glaring omissions, okay? I'll put it like that. There are some glaring omissions. But I think overall the music itself it's pretty good. I'd say it's better than serviceable, honestly. I would listen to it on its own.
Yeah, I think this is one you definitely have to take as its own entity instead of comparing it to the rest of Castlevania. Because if you compare it to the rest of Castlevania, it's lacking. I had a thought pop in my head as I was playing this. I'm like, they went for the Doom 64 approach. Because Doom is a similar thing. It's known for like basically MIDIing metal tunes and making it. And Doom, the 64 didn't have the capability to do that. So it went for like a dark, spooky, ambient noise. And this game does that very much so. So it matches the game. It doesn't match the franchise, which isn't always a bad thing. I think if you have limitations, work within your limitations. It generally ends up better. And I will say, for what he was working with, he did a pretty good job.
I agree.
Barry, what are your thoughts on the music? Kind of similar?
Considering I don't have a tie to Castlevania and a preconceived notion of what it should sound like, I also admit I didn't play this game with sound on for a lot of it because I was in an environment where I could not. But what I do remember is early on when I was able to play it with sound, I remember being like, oh, this sound music isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Right.
I think the sound is the strongest part of this game.
I would 100% agree with that.
I don't think the sound effects are very good, but the music isn't. I think it sets the tone, and I think it's okay for what was given. And me saying it's the best part of the game is still me saying like it's still kind of bad. like it's not. It doesn't really stick with you, and I'll say it wasn't a soundtrack that I wanted to turn the volume off because I couldn't stand it.
Right.
I was already playing the game and just being like, this sucks, but I did have like some tunes on it that I was like, okay, like these are pretty decent, like sounds pretty good. Doesn't sound great because of the console, but it's not awful.
Yeah.
It's not terrible. The sound effects are pretty boo-boo though.
I think the sound effects are okay. They're not as fuzzy as I would expect them to be, but at the same time, they aren't the classic Castlevania noises, which I think if we just brought 1-to-1 almost would have worked better.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about a game that tried to look realistic, but we're talking about motorcycle sidecar skeletons too. So like, I think if we just went with like the classic wink and a nod sounds, it would have honestly worked a little better. They did have some like bass to them, and there was like some thud to the sound effects. I'll give it that.
Have they ever?
The gun sounded good. Yeah.
Have they ever done like a reorchestration of any of these songs?
There is a couple of them in the Dead Cells expansion from this game.
That's awesome.
That are from this game, or just they're Castlevania
they're Castlevania ones, but there are a couple from this game too.
That's sick.
Okay, I'd be curious to hear what those are.
Me too.
I don't think it's like. I don't think it's bad in the sense of a composition being bad. I just think it's
limited.
The tools that were given were not like what it could have been. So I would have been really curious to hear like what they could do in modern times with it.
Yeah, I think I will specifically point out 2 songs that stood out to me. I think the song that most people remember from this game is the one in the Art Tower / Sinking Sanctuary. It's almost like orchestra, but this is really booming, loud. I don't know what those bass drums, I guess, is what you call them. That's the song you mostly see. If you watch anyone do like a retrospect on this game or anyone introduce this game in a review, like that's the song they're going to play. It's the one that stands out. It is, I would almost mild banger for an N64 game. The other one, me and Brian were kind of laughing at it. It's not a bad song per se, but it doesn't seem like it fits 100%. There's the one in the Underground Waterway where Brian's just playing. He's like, what the fuck is this Diddy Kong music? And it does kind of, it's got like wind chimes and like wood drums in it. So it's like a dong dong. It's tongy instead of like deep and scary. It's almost like trying to be like fantasy instead of like scary, and it doesn't fit. And we were kind of like, it's not a bad song. It's kind of like catchy, but it definitely doesn't fit what they were going for the rest of it. But it's also the first level where you're kind of like balls deep in the castle. So
which one do you want me to play on the transition?
The best one, it's called it's the Art Tower / Sinking Sanctuary.
All right, well if you're curious what that song is, it'll play right after
it's
this.
The one that most people remember from this game.
In a 20-second clip.
But yeah, I feel like unfortunately any other Castlevania game, we'd have a lot more to talk about with sound and stuff. I think they did what they could with what they had, and I think that's honestly, if you have limitations, work within your limitations. It generally works better. That's why we mostly have positive things to say about the sound in this game compared to other aspects of it, because other stuff was forced to fit a 3D. This felt like it was forced to fit within the limitations. So I think that pretty much wraps up sound and music.
Shout out to the goofy narrator at the beginning of the game. Dude's voice, I did not expect that.
Yeah, and it was only in the beginning, because the rest of the cinematics were not voice acted, to be clear. They were text-based.
I just love how he's like, man wolf. It's great.
Yeah, I kind of forgot about that, honestly.
No, he's great.
Maybe it's a good thing they went text-based. The big one, the grandiose finale of our Is It Worth It part. Let's talk about the collectability aspect of it. Alright guys, the big one, collectability. Full disclosure, this is an expensive game, and to further that, every region's pretty expensive, honestly, which is kind of surprising, because normally you get your PAL and your Japan, they're a lot more affordable. These stay expensive. Loose copies of the North American version of this game go between, I have an extra one, $115 to $130 just for the cart. Complete in box copy will run you close to $400. It's anywhere from $360 on the cheap end to $380 to $390 on the high end.
That's more than I thought.
Yeah,
last I remember, I thought it was like $230.
No, it's gone up and up. And I did find a couple examples of sealed copies. They averaged around $1,300, which seems low. It's before the sealed craze. Even in the PAL region, we're talking about an expensive game. Loose copies $80 to $100. People feel like they got a good deal at $80. I see most of them go for like $100, $110. Complete in box goes for about $330, complete in box and PAL. So,
which game was this?
Legacy of Darkness, same game.
Oh, PAL. Okay.
Yeah. And then lastly, Japan, it's kind of hard to find information on. I found a couple complete in box copies for $200, which you would expect Japan to be the cheapest version, but even then that is expensive for a Japanese game. I think the biggest contributing factor for the price of this game is when you get to the sales data. The number I kept finding repeatedly was 130,000. That is extremely low. And if you talk about a series as big, that is incredibly low.
That's halfway to a greatest hit.
Yeah. I think the release calendar, I think the releasing the same game in a lot of ways.
You know what? That's actually wild considering it was a December holiday release.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about with the release of this game. So this is basically closer to the true version of Castlevania 64 because, full disclosure, when you beat it with Henry after you beat it with Cornell, you'll unlock the characters from Castlevania 64 and you get to play a better version of Castlevania 64 on this game. It's funny now because you almost expect the game to come out with the second SKU. Where's my Game of the Year edition? In a lot of ways, this is like the prototype for Game of the Year edition. The problem is it literally came out technically less than a year later. And when you look at the reviews for this game, it gets that knocked against it a lot. People are very confused why this game even exists if you read reviews from back then. So Castlevania 64 reviewed fairly high. It averaged about an 8.2.
What?
The Metacritic's a 78 overall, which considers it a good game.
What was the user score on Metacritic, though?
Pretty much the same, surprisingly. Now, the flip side is Castlevania 64 nowadays, when you look at the modern reviews for it, like the user score now, it's very, very low for Castlevania 64. And this one's actually higher. So there's no Metacritic data on this game. So a lot of reviews didn't review Legacy of Darkness back then because they were like, it's the same game, and they just dropped it. But what I could find was an average of around 4 out of 10. IGN gave it the highest review I could find at a 6.8. But that's with the note that they gave 64 an 8.2. So modern thoughts on this game are this is by far the superior version. Don't even play 64. Play this one because you're going to have a better experience and it's not as bad as everyone says, which...
Oh, the Metacritic score tied to it on mine is Castlevania for the Game Boy Advance.
Interesting.
It doesn't even have an entry in Metacritic.
I found one for their 64, not for this one.
No, for the 64, mine's tying it to the Advance. Yeah, it looks like the Metacritic ones have the 33, like 33's mixed and 7% negative, but overall it's 60% positive.
Right.
Interesting.
Then Legacy of Darkness, it's harder to find like archived info of the time review because I think you very much have to look at this game of the time because it is dated. This game's got like a lot of 4s, a lot of 3s, like very, very, very poor reviews. And it came out during holiday time. And it came out the same year as Castlevania 64. Like, it was a game in a lot of ways. If you didn't now, people wouldn't even blink at it. I was kind of touching on the point earlier. You expect a Game of the Year edition when a game comes out and it's got DLC. This has Castlevania 64 on it, but it's got 2 full new chapters with 2 new playable characters. It's a different game. People didn't understand why you'd release the same SKU with the same shit on it with a little bit of extra coat of paint.
Well, a lot of the reused levels also are just, they're shortened.
Well, literally, some of the levels are 1-to-1. Like the garden level, that's like the bane of my existence in this game, is in Castlevania 64, and it's 1-to-1.
Yeah, but like the clock tower on this game compared to the last one, there's so many less jumps and so many less cogs spinning you have to go through. And then the crystal levels where they float, like that's significantly shortened by about
I
30
completely
minutes.
forgot about that level.
Uh-huh.
It's shortened
I wiped
by about,
that one from my brain.
That's the thing. So imagine playing that and not being able to stick and not be able to move the camera at all. And it's 30 minutes longer. That's the 64 version, yeah.
So I will say, like, this is a pretty obscure game, given the fact that, like, it's only sold 130,000, and Castlevania 64 is not super expensive. I want to say you can get it for under $100 complete. This one, not the case. This one's very hard to find in a box. It's very hard to find in general, honestly. It's one of the more expensive N64 games, so...
I don't see the cart too often. Yeah.
So it has that going for it. So to answer the overall question, is it worth it? Let's get the fun one out of the way first. Hey, Barry, tell us how you feel about it.
No. I don't think I need to really say why. This game's garbage. I don't care if this is a cardboard box 64 exclusive. No, do not buy this game. Just don't. Especially for $400, you gotta be high.
It's so expensive.
It is very pricey, and I think it's one of those games where we talk about them all the time where it's like the quality doesn't quite match the price point, and this would be a pretty good example of it. So Barry's got a definitive no, which I was actually really excited for this episode because we were talking kind of at the year in review. It's like, man, we haven't had a no in like a long time. I think this is like maybe the first candidate where I know Barry definitely feels
Leave
no.
it to Nate to bring the nose.
Yeah, I gotta do my job. So Brian, as a Castlevania collector, Castlevania person, what are your thoughts on this game's collectability aspect? I think you can bring a different perspective to it because Barry's pure gameplay collecting as it should be in your collection. She says, hell no.
So this one's weird because it's got a lot of things that like I go for. It's a Castlevania game for starters. Like I want every Castlevania game. So me personally, like I do have a copy of this game. It's just the cartridge. I don't have a complete box copy because it's an insane amount of money. Secondly, if I'm going from just like a collecting purpose, I think this cover art is ugly as shit.
Oh, that is something. That is something I want to touch on.
Power pose. But if you look at the PAL version, it's beautiful, bro.
Yeah,
it's
all
like
three SKUs have different cover art.
Yeah,
and we got shafted. We got the worst one by far.
You know what the worst part about this is? It's like a fully man-wolf man with like the hairy chest and the hairy arms and the hair coming out and the mane, and then he's got like sort of shorts on and then just normal human feet. Yeah. Like no claw feet.
At least he's not wearing like Converse.
Standing on the skeleton with the busted Dracula face in the background.
Look at that, and look at this PAL version, how beautiful this is. It's like a classic painted Castlevania cover with like the boat.
With the boat?
The moon,
that's way cooler.
Bats. The PAL version's beautiful, bro.
US always gets doo-doo.
Japan version's
ugly, but like
it's pretty dog shit. It's just shitty renders. Surprise. Shitty renders.
It looks like
at least Dracula
looks like
Dante.
Yeah. But yeah, that's one thing to note. What's usually crazy, like Nate alluded to, the other region variants are usually way more price affordable. And this cartridge, you're still paying $100 for the cartridge for the PAL version, which is wild.
That was surprising to me. Because even the cheapest Japanese copy I can find was $200
for a cart.
No, it's complete.
For a cart, it's about $60.
It's not super plentiful to find.
Right. And that's the thing, 64 is not region free, so you're going to have to grab a Japanese 64. And as far as I understand, this game's never been brought to anything else, correct?
It is an N64 exclusive.
Yeah. This is one I don't see going on Nintendo Marketplace. This is one I don't see them doing a 3D Castlevania collection anytime soon.
No, I'd be shocked if they brought this to anything because like it's not even in canon anymore. It's super.
Well, because here's the thing, like Kid Dracula's not in canon either, and they still included it in the Castlevania collection. But I think there's a big black eye on this game in the Castlevania community.
Well, I believe collections are basically emulators, and I believe for the longest time 64 emulation was very difficult.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it took us this long to even get 64 emulation on the Switch, and even then it doesn't run great. Right. So, I think that might be due to the fact that, like, it was kind of hard to figure out.
And you're certainly not going back and investing any monetary effort into making this game work now, because it's not...
At least officially. I mean, like, emulators unofficially seem to run fine, but they just can't figure it out with people who get paid money to figure it out. But whatever. Whatever.
This game's a curiosity piece. Like, as a Castlevania fan, I played Castlevania 64, and I was like, ugh, and I didn't want to finish this. The thing is, if you're going into it expecting it from a Castlevania fan perspective, you're going to be disappointed because it's a 3D platforming game. It doesn't add anything to the story. You're not going to miss... connections between Belmont relatives. This is a tough one for me because, like, I have a copy and I paid pretty good money for my copy. It was just a cart, but, like, I wasn't happy about it. It was just one of those things where it's like, you have to pay to play. It's the only way you're going to do it. I think it's going to stay that way because let's just hypothetically say they do another, Castlevania collection. You'll have to have this, Laminate of Sorrow. What's the other 3D
Lament.
one? Lament, yeah. What's the other 3D one? But that's the thing. Like, it doesn't even match up well with those, right? It stands out so far on its own, even from those PS2, original Xbox era games. I don't see this one ever getting released on anything else, ever. I don't even think, like Barry said, Virtual Console, I don't think is happening on this game. So in an interesting sense, you have to pay to play, and, like, I did pay to play, but I don't feel good about my purchase. It's one of the few that I'm like, man, I really paid this much for a cart. I think I paid like $70 for my cart. This was years ago, mind you.
Curse of Darkness is the other 3D Castlevania.
Thank you.
You know what's funny to me about this one is like it's Castlevania, but it's so far from being a Castlevania game that you and the Castlevania people were like, we're shaming this one. We don't want anything to do with it.
I would definitely say it's but it's like the pre-Lord of Shadows 2. It is the black sheep of the Castlevania series.
Dude, Lord of Shadows 2 at least like has a little... There's
fucking robots.
Dracula,
Fucking robots.
Yeah, but this one has Dracula. And who else?
Death.
Yeah.
And Death.
Yeah, but that's it. There's like no Belmonts. There's no whip.
Right, I know. Yeah. And then
It's such a weird.
That's, I mean, I feel like this one is so far from being
Sure.
Castlevania. It's like, is it really Castlevania,
I'll
though?
bring up an interesting point because I have this N64 complete in box because I'm a Castlevania collector as well. At the time, I really felt like I was sweating. I bought this game when I was hanging out with Barry one day, and I was like, "Damn, I can't believe I just paid $180 for that complete."
I do
in
remember
box.
laughing because the box art was just.
And I was
too
like
much.
a little stressed out about my purchase of spending $180 on it. Now it's
The thing is, from a
good deal,
from a monetary standpoint, this game has retained value and gone up because it is an exclusive. You don't see the box for this game at all. It was a long-standing like rumor that this was like a Blockbuster exclusive, right? That's like a
right
kind
because
of a
it was
weird
solo
thing.
print.
Yeah, it truly is just a scarce game, and it has gone up. Like it has stayed consistent. You know, this is a weird one for me. I don't love this game. I love Castlevania. I don't feel like you're missing out as a collector if you don't play this or buy it. Quite frankly.
There's been some data your way, so you can get a copy of 64 Castlevania for $70 complete in box. This game does have Castlevania 64 on it technically, with the 2 characters being unlocked after you beat it with the 2 Legacy of Darkness characters.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. Castlevania people are going to want both.
Right.
Even if this
I
game
bought
has
both.
Castlevania 64 on it, you still are going to want
Well, it's the
Castlevania
thing, too.
64.
This is such a better version of Castlevania 64. Like, this is the one you want to play. No questions asked whatsoever. I don't think anybody out there is going to come on here and debate anybody. Join me in Discord if you think that's the truth. Like, I would love to have that debate.
Well, the fun part about this, though, is like, yeah, an enhanced, better version of 64, Castlevania 64 is on this game. Well, you have to go through to get to it. It's not available out the gate.
Yep.
Right.
You have to go through doo-doo and then, like,
twice.
semi-less doo-doo when you're Henry shooting things.
Just to play more
Just to
doo-doo.
play the 64 game.
Which the 64 game is not great, honestly. So it's almost like a weird rotted cherry on top. But that's the thing. My argument for these type of games is if you have to pay to play, like this is what you're going to have to do. And this is the only way I think you're ever going to get this game.
I certainly,
That being said, holy
I gotta
shit.
say no.
A complete in-box copy is so expensive.
I certainly
man.
think this is one of those games. If you can go back in time when 64 was out, and spending $60 on it, people were so appalled that they had to rebuy this game. Like you could go back in time and buy this game for $60, you would do it all day. But
Absolutely, yeah. And then honestly, the price you paid it under $200 for a complete.
I had a
copy.
coupon, so the reason why I got under 200.
Yeah, it's like half off. Like I would do that, sure, just because I am a Castlevania guy. But if I wasn't, I'm trying to take my personal bias out of this. This is a hard pill to swallow, man. This is the first one I've ever kind of leaned toward more no than yes. And
That's what I mean. This game is so awful that like exclusive cardboard on a 64 is not saving this.
Because that's the thing, like Daikatana was awful too, but it was like a Blockbuster exclusive. I think it's going to retain value, and I kind of think this one will too. So
Daikatana was more fun, and I didn't like that game.
I wholeheartedly
Right.
disagree. I think I like this game the most, to be transparent. I think this is significantly better than Daikatana 64.
So my gut tells me no, but honestly, sticking to my convictions and being like, this is the only way you can pay to play it, I would say at least get a cartridge. Cartridge is going to retain value.
It's expensive.
It is an expensive cartridge, but that's the thing. No matter
Well,
which region
it's an expensive cartridge, but like the jump for getting a in box is
Yeah.
over double.
Which
I
is
agree.
crazy. This is a very hard box to get.
and that cartridge is floated around $100 for a couple of years now.
Yeah,
I'm
it
talking
has-
4 or 5 years.
Like you can't even make the argument of like, well, if you're already spending 150 on the cart, you might as well bump it up to the 200 mark to get the box.
Right.
It is so
It's a
far
huge
beyond
jump.
cart price that like,
It's a
what are you
it's
paying for there?
kind of a
Right.
shocking jump, and like for not even being a unique box style, like Hey You Pikachu's got that crazy thick. This is a normal 64 box. Like it's a huge jump, and it's got to be a scarcity thing. Which if there is something we're valuing here for monetary, scarcity should be a huge equation for it. Some of these games just stay expensive because people like them. This is not the case. This is, I believe, marketed the way it is because it is obscure and rare.
The data has showed that too. It's stayed consistent pretty much where it's at, even through the highs and the lows.
I think there would be something more collectible about this if it was a double pack in with
Yep.
with Legacy of Darkness having its own prequel thing, and then it also included another cart of 64, and the 64 like label was different, specific for like this double pack, and it had like a double-sided like manual where instead of like 2 manuals it had the same one, but you had to flip it over to get the other manual. Like there'd be more pieces about this that were collectible because it can only be in that pack. But
My personal
this is just kind of a standard game.
My personal thoughts, unless you're an N64 completionist where you want everything complete in box, a Castlevania completionist where you want everything complete in box, it's hard for me to say yes on this one. This is from the person who liked the game the most at the table. As far as N64 games, if this would have come out as a launch game, this would be one of the better remembered N64 games in my opinion. It's almost 2 years after launch, however.
Oof.
60.
That's a hot take, brother.
And
Talk about the launch games. Mario 64 is clearly the best one.
Mario 64 is timeless also.
It's clearly the best one. Mario 64 is aged a little bit.
Do we
Like
know
GoldenEye?
what studio was working on this in Konami? Like the main Konami studio?
Yep.
That's what's crazy.
Not even like the B team?
No, it's the 18
You gotta
Pro.
think. That's the thing though with this. This is their first 3D console game. So,
Yeah, but at that point,
It's
like the
super
console had already been
intimidating.
put out for 2 years.
well, for Castlevania 64 1, you gotta think. It's a 1-year-old game. And they had a whole extra year to develop this version. So, you're working with technology. You have basically they did one 3D game before this at the arcade, but that is a completely different topic. You know what I mean? Working with far more limitations and a console you're not super familiar with, forcing a 2D peg into a 3D hole.
I've got to say it because I want to be definitive. For me, my vote is cartridge yes. Anything past that's got to be a no.
Cartridge at yes, even for me, is a little sketchy, honestly.
It is, but the fact that it's hung out
And
there and retained value,
part of
and if
that-
you don't like it, I feel like it's an easier sell.
Part of that is the way watching Barry play it on Steam Deck. I'm like, damn, I would have much rather had this experience free than...
I played it on a digital copy that I own.
Yes. Yeah,
You don't know where I live.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, though. Like, I feel
This
like
game's
this is,
mine now. It's in my house.
Yeah.
Say you do buy a cartridge, I feel like it's a pretty easy. You could like at least get your money back. You know.
I'm going to say if you're in this shit for money, this one's not a bad investment. It has gone up continually. It's not what I'm about, though. I'm about... The reason why I'm keeping this game after playing it is because it's Castlevania, to be clear. If it wasn't, I would probably trade this off for Phantasy Star 3 and 4.
I think I'm in the same boat. Man.
Like,
I think that's the reason why I struggle with it. It's because it is Castlevania, and I am such a huge fan.
it's not
That's
a good...
the line sometimes.
Yeah, and that's the reason it's in my
I'm
collection,
sick.
to be clear. Is
I mean,
because-
there are things that like you're a diehard and you got to take the shit with the good to
Yep.
like really like it. You know.
I'll put it this way. I'm glad it's already in my collection, so I don't have this dilemma of like having to go spend $400 on it, because like getting it for $180 feels really good about now, and that wasn't horribly long ago. That was like 5 years ago. Less.
I don't know.
It was 3 years ago. It was 3 years ago. 3 years ago and 2 months. I remember when I bought this game. It was not
During
that long.
COVID time?
Right. Well, it was 4 years ago.
About
it was
4?
It was very close after my mother passed away, so it was about 4 years ago.
Okay.
I bought it in February. So right before my birthday. I was like, fuck, because we were supposed to go. I was supposed to go do something, and I was setting up for my wedding. Is what it was. But we pushed it back a year because of the pandemic. So I was like, I'm gonna buy it anyways. Fuck it. And because I was like, I shouldn't be doing
I
this.
do remember that because you
Yeah.
were like,
Damn.
man, I can't. I gotta save for
Fuck,
the
I'm really supposed to
wedding.
be saving for my
And then I
wedding.
was like, fuck the wedding. You're gonna get married one way or the other by the game.
Yeah.
So,
$40 at the courthouse, baby.
So yeah. So that wasn't that long ago. This game's gone up significantly since, and it's stayed going up. It's climbed my leaderboard for most valuable games. I'm pretty sure it's in my. I know it's in my top 10. I think it's in my top 5, honestly.
Ooh.
So
Ooh, 2 64 games in your top 5.
I have a very 64 heavy collection, and it's
Can we
funny.
tell about his podcast?
Yeah,
Ugh.
yeah.
Which is really funny because you don't have a lot of 64 games.
Compared to shit I don't. I have 27 64 games.
Whew.
And most of them are complete in box. It's kind
Yeah,
of
but even then, that's a low number.
it's a low number.
That is a pretty low number.
I mean, there's a low number of games for this piece of shit console. Anyway,
But yeah, it's hard for me to say yes on this one. I would say if you're a completionist, if you're in it for the money, if you're in it for a Castlevania, yeah, it's a good one. Any other reason? Hell no. Like, there's
I'll
not a
say
lot of
this.
there's not a lot of games I can justify spending $400 for that are bad, to be honest with you. And this one, the only thing it's got going for it is Castlevania, which is a dying franchise. Let's just call it what it is, dude. You and me love it because we grew up with it, but there's no future for Castlevania that we know
well,
of.
I don't know. I feel like the Advanced Collection and the Castlevania Anniversary Collection kind of put a lot of eyes back on.
The good ones,
Yeah, exactly. And I think there is
traditional
more of a
Castlevania games.
there's more of a fever pitch. If we do see this revived, we will get a Metroidvania, which is good. It's what we need. So, I will say this: if this wasn't a Castlevania game, I think my answer would be definitively no.
I think if this
even
is-
being a 64 exclusive, because it's not a good 64 exclusive.
I like this game the best by far, I think, at this table. It surprised me because I had heard this game's utter dog shit for years, and I thought it was an average of the time game. I also play extremely limited dated games on a regular basis. Like, for God's sakes, my favorite game is Morrowind. It's one of the most dated games ever made. So I can go back in time and look at dated games and put myself back then and kind of fit snugly. So
Nate has more patience than us. Let's just
I
say
am
that
patient.
if for some reason we were gonna do this and nobody had it, and I helped buy in for this, and then I had to play this, I'd be like, I'm not doing the podcast anymore. I quit. You guys made me buy this game for this podcast. I'm out. I'm not doing it.
Barry definitely had the least amount of fun in this experience.
Nate, did you ever play Castlevania 64 before this?
I would say dabbled, play, like sit down and play.
Which is funny because I had the most enjoyment in the platforming, and it was horrible.
Yeah, it is a significantly better game than Castlevania 64.
Oof.
Yeah.
Castlevania 64 is $70 complete in box too, though, to be clear. So like,
That's what's crazy to me.
and it's far more available.
It's such a
Like,
hard
You can go
pill to
out and find Castlevania 64.
I see carts of those a
I see
lot.
boxes for
Everywhere.
that a lot. It's
You
one of
get
the
cards
most.
for like $12.
Yeah,
So, no.
I'm gonna say unless you're a complete in box, generally no, because unless you're a Castlevania completionist, N64 completionist, like full set collector, or like just pure investment. Yeah, I think it's smart for all those. Because I think it's still going up. But I'm saying in general, so if you're like, I want to collect games I enjoy and like I'm keeping it because it's Castlevania. If I had to pay $400, I probably want to go out and do it. And if I did, it'd be like one of the last things I need.
Would you pay $150 for the cart?
No.
Then 2 no's and a yeah.
That's the thing.
2 no's and a yes with conditions.
I can't justify that complete in box price, man. That's crazy. It's the Kirby 2 argument, Dreamland 2 argument all over again. Like, I can't justify that. Get the cart, sure, but if you hate it, you can sell it, make your money. It's the only way you can play it. It's the only reason why I'm saying yes, though. So there is
Which
a
is usually
big
a
ass asterisk
huge
next to it.
sway for our conversation here. Is like, oh, it's the only way you can play it. But like, you could live a happy, comfortable life without playing this game.
Yeah.
And this is
Yeah.
someone that liked it the most.
You could actually have a better life if you didn't play
Well,
this game.
to be
If I had
clear-
to definitively pick one, I'm going no.
To put it all out, like none of us are huge 64 people, but we can all name 10 games without thinking that are better on N64 that you should put your money into than this, to be honest.
There's 10 games on
Can
64.
5.
Can we?
I can. My God, guys.
To be fair, I never owned a 64 in my life. I
Mine
never
collects
grew up with
dust.
it. I never did any of it.
Yeah, our neighbor had one, but I mean, like, there's franchises that spawn out of the 64 that are like
3
important,
of those 5 games are Mario Party, so like
important pieces of
Mario
video
Party
game.
1, Mario Party 2, Mario Party 3.
Mario 64 and Smash. There's 5, I guess.
I'm not going to turn this argument into an N64 soapbox, but like, yeah, it is limited, but there's a lot of things it did for video games, man. Like, it was definitely the bridge between 3D and good 3D, no doubt. No one's going to sit here and pretend otherwise, but I don't think this is an example of like the highest quality if you're trying to get someone into a 64, if it's the console you grew up on, and you're like, hey, Barry, I have this console I love. It's an N64. I'm not showing you this game.
There's
Like,
better platformers on the console.
Yeah.
I'd be
Joking
ghosting you on a
aside.
text
You're
message.
playing, what's it called? Fucking
Missile Ninja Bro.
that or Quest 64. Like,
Right.
there's way better. Conquer. There's better games that are like
Banjo.
action pop. Banjo, Mario 64,
Yeah,
both the Zelda titles. This is not coming up until very deep. This is only coming up. You're talking about expensive shit. Like Castlevania people aren't gonna bring this game up. N64 people aren't gonna bring this game up. No one has childhood ties to fucking Legacy of Darkness. So
This game is shelf porn in its purest form,
It
bro,
is.
because you ain't ever going to play it after you play it once.
I even said after we played it, I said, well, I'm glad I played it here because I'm never playing it again. Like, I won't play this
Oh,
game again.
man.
Like, I would put it in for the lulz to shoot some shit with Henry maybe, but like, that's because I already have it saved on a memory card. I'm not going to go and lock him again. Like, the skeleton on a motorcycle is not worth $400, $360. I'm sorry.
Hey man, that one
He's
falling off
dope,
the
though.
roof in the first cutscene is really funny though.
So, you're welcome. I finally had the first no in a long time, but it was necessary. We need to keep you on your toes on the Collecti-Bros podcast. But
All right. Here's where I'm guessing we're gonna have 3 no's this year.
all from me.
No, I didn't say that. I just think we're gonna
Asking.
have 3 no's.
I haven't even looked. I try not to go in with preconceived.
One from each of us.
Okay.
That's my guess.
Well, this one's the first unanimous no in a long time. The only one I can think of off the top of my head is Rule Rose, which I feel the same way about that game.
Did we all say unanimous no on Godzilla?
I think I was fanboying and say yeah.
Boy!
That's kind of our dynamic, though.
It's weird, though, because a lot of the same arguments I use in that, I use for this, and that's why I kind of had to lead towards card only.
I think Godzilla has a lot more lasting power than Castlevania, though.
Yeah.
Like, Castlevania's on its last leg, so... Hey, thanks for listening. Discuss with us if you... I'm pretty sure this Discord's going to turn into an N64 debate, but we'll welcome it. We'll welcome the challenge. Let us know if you guys have any experience with Legacy of Darkness or Castlevania 64. Any other interesting caveats to the development of this game? There's a lot out there. We'd love to hear from you. Love to discuss it with you. Sincerely appreciate each and every one of you that listen to this podcast. Let's tell everyone what's in the pipeline next. Brian, what is the next adventure we're embarking on here on the Collecti-Bros podcast?
We're having a discussion about games transitioning from 2D into 3D. What's good about them? What's bad about them? What works? What genres are affected? It's a good chat.
This game's an appropriate bridge to that episode.
It really is.
So
I believe it comes up.
we appreciate each and every one of you. Stay oppressed. Stay gaming. Peace.
Gamers!
Shit, it's good. It's good. Good day.